Good afternoon, and thank you all for being here. The American Bar Association's Young Lawyers Division is pleased to present today's webinar, Practical Considerations when Providing Pro Bono Representation. I'm Nick Seger, and I'll be the moderator for today's discussion. I join you today from the University of Dayton School of Law, where I serve as an assistant professor of academic success. Joining me today, we have three distinguished panelists, Kathryn Lafrentz, Jay Spotswood, and Alexis Yeboah-Cody. Thank you all for taking the time to be here and share your thoughts with us on this important topic. Before we begin our discussion, I would like to tell our guests a little bit more about each panelist. Kathryn is a graduate of the University of California's Berkeley School of Law. She began her legal career as a judicial law clerk for the Honorable J.C. Zaney of the Eastern District of Louisiana. She also served as Director of Community Advocacy at Disability Rights Louisiana, which is a nonprofit protection and advocacy agency. There, she provided legal oversight and case management support for state and federal programs that served people with disabilities. From 2018 through 2021, she held the role of Executive Director for Campus Accessibility and ADA Coordinator at Tulane University. In that role, she provided legal support and supervision to Tulane's Office of Disability Services. She served as the point of contact for all staff and faculty seeking employment-related accommodations, and she led campus-wide efforts to promote equal access and inclusion. Kathryn joined the Pro Bono Project of New Orleans as Director of Legal Services in June of 2021. The Pro Bono Project of New Orleans is a nonprofit that provides free civil legal assistance to low-income residents across 6 parishes. Thank you, Kathryn, for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Jay is a graduate of the Ohio State University Moritz College of Law. Her practice has focused on a wide range of transactional and litigation matters in the energy industry. Specifically, she has experience litigating and advising developers appearing before the Ohio Power Siting Board and the Public Utilities Commission of Ohio. She has represented clients in energy-related transactions by drafting lease option agreements, right-of-way agreements, revising power purchase agreements, and has advised clients on electricity rate cases. In the renewable energy industry, Jay has litigated on behalf of wind developers and assisted with due diligence in the sale of wind and solar energy companies. She has also represented natural gas companies in mineral lease disputes. Jay currently serves as staff attorney to the Honorable Judge Andy Miller at the Franklin County Common Pleas Court in Columbus, Ohio, where she handles discovery disputes, drafts decisions, and provides recommendations to the judge on civil matters before the court. Thanks, Jay, for being here.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Alexis earned her Juris Doctorate degree from Harvard School of Law. She worked with a variety of community and movement lawyering organizations, such as Community Justice Project in Miami, Arch City Defenders in St. Louis, the Legal Resources Center in Accra, Ghana, and the Gulf Coast Center for Law and Policy in Louisiana. With these organizations, Alexis's areas of focus adapted and shifted to the needs of the communities in which she was rooted. Alexis is currently the Skadden Fellow and staff attorney at the Justice and Accountability Center of Louisiana. Her project there addresses accessibility to driver's licenses from a criminalization of poverty standpoint. Through license application and child support representation, coalition building, and policy development and advocacy. Alexis has been recognized for her commitment to movement lawyering and community empowerment through her career, and in fact, she won the William J. Stuntz Award for Justice, Human Dignity, and Compassion. Thank you, Alexis, as well for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
To kick us off, panelists, it would be great to hear more detail about your past and current pro bono representations and your reflections on how the pro bono experience you gained early in your career has helped you to build your skill set as an attorney. Kathryn, could I start with you here?
Yes. So my current role is sort of the opposite side of the pro bono experience. I help pair pro bono cases and opportunities with volunteers. But at one point, I worked for a small local firm doing civil litigation and was feeling just like I missed public interest work. I missed working directly with clients. I was doing mostly document review, and I wanted to learn something new. So I signed up for a program a local program that was pairing volunteer attorneys with children who were undocumented and were seeking special immigrant juvenile status. I was very nervous. I had never done anything immigration related before. And there was also a language barrier involved with the young clients. But the organization that I worked with paired me with another lawyer who had slightly more experience in immigration than I did. They paired us with a translator from a local university. And they gave us pretty detailed instructions and templates on how to go through this process that would have been very difficult for the clients and their guardians to navigate on their own. And ultimately, over the course of a few months and probably about 10 or 15 hours of actual work, we were able to secure legal status for these clients and get them on a path to legal citizenship. And it was just incredibly rewarding and just reminded me of why I wanted to go to law school in the first place. So that was one experience that really stood out for me.
Thanks, Kathryn. Jay, could I ask you to weigh in?
Yeah, so currently I work for the court, so it's a little bit difficult to get hands-on as there may be some conflicts there. But prior to my time at the court, I was at a firm that was really, really big on pro bono. And now I do work with the local John Mercer Langston Bar Association, which is our local Black bar associations, in finding opportunities for young lawyers. But I'd say that my experience with pro bono work has been amazing in the sense that I've gotten the best client satisfaction from that end. One experience I remember is a consumer debt case where, an older lady, had some health issues, fell behind on her bills, and, the credit card company was now filed suit in order to obtain payment for her past due account. I think the best part of that experience was really walking with her through not only the legal part, but her life. This is something that taking away money from one area would really affect her livelihood in terms of paying her bills. And so, we were able to negotiate with the other side, and after some back and forth, and lowering that, I think it was a $3,000 bill to $600. And she was super, super happy with that result. She gave me the best, note or kind of like experience in terms of sending me this note that I hung in my office of, you were, the best attorney that I've ever had, and just seeing the difference and the impact that it made in her life, I guess was kind of the way that my first experience in getting involved with pro bono work.
That's great. Thanks, Jay. And Alexis, could I have you tell us about your experience a little bit?
Sure. So my job currently would be considered pro bono work, but I've been thinking, as other panelists have been talking about, when I was still a law student, which is, very fresh for me, and how when I was first starting out and in law school, when they're requiring you to have a certain amount of pro bono hours, figuring out what skills did I already have and how do I transfer those skills into either net neutral or like net positive and favorable outcomes for clients. And so I really took advantage of the different kinds of practice organizations and of the different clinics in order to build on the skills that I already had. And I think what was great about the practice organizations and the clinics that were available to me was that you could obtain or achieve those pro bono hours by plugging into your comfort level. So I know people in, so I was very involved in the Prison Legal Assistance Project at Harvard. And there were people who got pro bono hours just for doing intake and answering the phones. And then they built up their comfort levels to, going into the prisons. Because of my experiences before law school, I had already had more comfort with going into prison. So I went into prisons immediately, even if it was in a different context. And really being able to build on, okay, I'm here in this capacity as a lawyer, I'm here in this capacity as representation, and I'm really passionate about advocating for you, but I'm still learning how to do that. And so for me, in those early stages of figuring out how to be most helpful to community members or to people who I'm representing, it was that honesty. And I've found that like that transparency and honesty was one of the most important skills that I've had to build, even now being, in my second year of practice, still being like, I have certain expertises and accesses that are going to be helpful for you. And I'm also still learning this completely new area of law. We're developing this new area of law together, and going from there. So for my clients who I'm representing currently, it's all around enforcing a law that was passed a couple of years ago. And there's not really any case law on this topic besides the case law that is being developed with my clients. And I think that being honest with them about, hey, we're all learning this right now, even the state, even the people who have developed and put this law on the books, we're all trying to figure it out. And we're all, I'm going to do my best to balance your needs with these other needs and get the outcome that I believe you rightfully deserve. And so that is really, that level of honesty, I think, is one of the biggest skills that I developed in the beginning pro bono practice. And then also just understanding and identifying what are my transferable skills, what am I good at, and how do I use that as an entry point into addressing certain problems or needs that there are in the communities, in the landscape that I'm trying to plug into.
That's excellent. Thank you. And for our next question, Jay, maybe I could return to you. Obviously, everybody here is pretty passionate about pro bono work, but why do you think it's really important for all young lawyers to regularly include pro bono representation in their practice?
I think this may sound a little silly, but I think it keeps you humble. I think it keeps you humble and connected to the community. And that's something you need no matter what area of law that you're practicing in, because you'll be directly assisting community members who will remember you and remember the impact that you've had on their lives. And, on the other sense, you'll also be rubbing shoulders with other attorneys, learning from other attorneys, finding your community amongst in the legal space as well. So I think it's important to continue to develop that community aspect from both angles, from the people who are non-lawyers in the community doing the work to help people have access to or obtain access to justice, but also you'll be developing your community as an attorney in the legal space as well. And I think from my hat as a staff attorney, I think it's also, we at the courts are burdened, particularly after COVID. We're catching up on cases where things had slowed down during shutdown. And so pro bono work is especially important now to really ensure that particular indigent clients have access to justice, that it alleviates the burden on the court system. It promotes, judicial efficiency, judicial economy in having another attorney on the other side, because it does get challenging as the court, who cannot give legal advice, who cannot direct the client or the pro se litigant one way or another. It really helps to ensure that they don't have a judgment against them for whatever reason, primarily because they don't know the law and how to practice, but also that they are, their interests are fairly protected or represented in their case.
Thanks, Jay. Alexis, could I have you weigh in next?
Sure. So I definitely agree with Jay around the humility element and also staying just connected to particular aspects and elements of community, however that may be defined in your case or circumstance. For me, and in my work, a lot of the times, when I say community, I mean people who have criminal records, people who are formerly incarcerated or may currently be incarcerated and are just about to return home. And I think the need is really, really high. And I think in terms of staying connected to like the very real problems that people experience regularly and understanding that, lawyers have roles, like lawyers have very particular roles in attempting to alleviate those problems. And also just in terms of like building your own ability, you're kind of like the soft and hard skills of lawyering in terms of that empathy and that humility when it comes to interacting with other people. And then also that in some cases litigation, in some cases, just learning a new area of law, and learning from the expertise of other attorneys like Jay was mentioning, and knowing that like you are needed in very specific ways. Like the Justice and Accountability Center has monthly expungement clinics. And in order to be a part of those expungement clinics, attorneys have to like do a CLE, get baseline knowledge, and then, it's sometimes trial by fire, learning from the attorneys who are more experienced, myself and my colleagues during the clinics. But every time we have a clinic, there's way more people that need support than can get it in that moment. And that clinic isn't necessarily going into like representation down the line, but you are giving people the tools to be able to represent themselves more adequately, and also limiting the amount of time that they have to spend figuring certain things out. So yes, the need is very, very high. And I think that there's a mutual benefit in a lot of ways when it comes to pro bono work, in terms of lawyering.
Thank you. And Kathryn?
Y'all covered that so thoroughly. I mean, I completely agree with the mutual benefit part. On the attorney's side, from the attorney's perspective, there's skills building, there's networking, keeping different areas of your practice sharp or learning new areas of practice. Those are all very important. I know in Louisiana, you can also get CLE credit for volunteering, which is a small added bonus. And on the client side, the need really is great. And to give you a sense of how great, in the state of Louisiana, for instance, 75% of civil cases involve at least one self-represented litigant. So there are just major access to justice barriers based solely on financial reasons, on income. And we also have a problem that's a problem in many states where we have legal deserts. So there are many people who live more than 45 minutes car ride away from the nearest legal aid office. And we're working on different ways to get them support and get them the help that they need. But when you have only one legal aid attorney for every 11,250 people who qualify for legal aid services, that's when you really need the private bar to step up and volunteer their time and energy to help fill that gap. And so that's why I'm so glad you're here talking about this.
Absolutely. Thank you. And Alexis, I'll come back to you on this one. Why might young lawyers avoid pro bono work? And what are the potential pitfalls to providing pro bono representation as a young lawyer? And relatedly, how would you overcome those obstacles and avoid those pitfalls?
Yeah, so I think that the biggest one is fear and lack of confidence in your abilities and in the, especially particularly with areas of law that you might not be comfortable with or know that well. And I know that lawyers sometimes can be a little risk averse. We've all been there. But back to something I said a little earlier in terms of tapping into what those transferable skills are. What are the skills that you already have? And how can that work for you in terms of an entry point? I think also something that can feel scary or young lawyers can be cognizant of is the fact that a lot of communities with high needs for legal representation historically have fraught and tense relationships with lawyers, with systems. And so the idea of not wanting to do more harm can also be a preventative measure. But I think in terms of if you're being diligent in your study of the area and you're being honest and genuine in your desire to put forth and advocate for someone to the best of your ability, I think that it's an opportunity to learn together because we are all imperfect people. And I think when we lead with that and we lead with a certain level of like respect, that is going to come back to us for sure. I also quickly wanted to mention, in a lot of these issues, like a lot of the times an attorney will be coming in on a very concrete, specific issue, but there are all of these other interlinking issues that could be happening, whether they are legal or social or other things. So it could be daunting to try and maintain your representation to one very specific problem or issue that someone is facing. And I think that's when, you have limited appearance agreements or, very particular kinds of retainers. And if someone needs support, either from a family member or a social worker or something of that nature, making sure that the parameters are really clear. And it's like, this is where I'm limited and where I have to make sure that I'm not going to put my license in jeopardy. And like, this is how you can be involved in it in this way to make sure that you are getting the information, understand the information that I'm giving you. And also this is what we need to do to make sure that we're in compliance with the bar and the court. So that can also be a little bit daunting, but, ask for help, ask for, the help of other attorneys, and being honest in those ways, I think can really be useful. But knowing and coming into it with, you have skills, and at minimum, you have an access that a lot of people do not have. Just calling a place and being like, hi, I'm an attorney, I need this information. You'll get the information way faster than a person calling and asking on their own behalf. Like, you could ask the same question. I've had situations where I call, I ask a question, I get the information for free. Whereas my client calls, they ask for the information, they get transferred all over the state, and then they have to pay $25 for that information. And just that little piece of it can make things go faster and can be an opener for people into this area that can be very scary. This area being the law.
Thanks, Alexis. Kathryn, I'd love to hear your thoughts on how young lawyers can avoid pitfalls and overcome any apprehensions they might have.
I definitely agree that a lack of confidence and the other factor that I hear a lot is just a lack of time. I mean, when you start work or when you move up within your organization and get more responsibility, you're often swamped. And the first thing that tends to go is feeling like you have time to volunteer and do things outside of work. And I completely understand that. What I try to tell people who are considering volunteering with our organization is, if you work with an organization that does this and that regularly pairs people with pro bono opportunities, we can tailor the pro bono work to fit your schedule and to fit your interests and make it something that is rewarding for you, but doesn't overwhelm you. So I just like to let people know that pro bono work looks like many different things. It can look like taking on a case that could be a long-term case, but it could also be something that can be done completely remotely in a matter of hours. It could be making that phone call, like Alexis said. It could be just reviewing documents and notarizing them for someone, research and writing. So don't be afraid of the time commitment. Just know that you can help somebody in a lot of different ways, and you have the skills to do that.
Thanks, Kathryn. And Jay, could you weigh in?
Yeah, I just want to say a small piece because it's been covered so well here. But I think following up on that timepiece, I think that is a big one. But I also want to push folks in, remembering that we're a part of a profession that values service. And sometimes the people you're serving are paying, sometimes they're not. And service, it requires some sacrifice. Service oftentimes requires sacrifice. And I get it. I get, that we're a part of hustle culture and time is ever, a factor in what we choose to do. But I think a good place to even overcome that is to start with an issue or something that you care about. And start there. And I think we make time for things we care about. And so if you care about, for example, I care about immigrant rights and things like that. I'm an immigrant myself. It's also one of the safe areas because it's federal law that I can touch. And so I'm currently looking for ways and have been getting more and more involved in ways that I can help immigrants that need legal services. That's something I personally care about and want to see change. And I think a lot of us attorneys came into this profession because we want to fix things. And I think that's a good place to start. I think another hindrance might be fear, especially for young attorneys. I know, kind of tying into that confidence piece, that you're just fearful of many, messing up, or even fearful if you just have never really worked with a client before or with a certain type of demographic before. And I think a good place to start is to, I think Kathryn mentioned working with organizations that they are going to hold your hands through the process, particularly your first time, your second time. They're going to hold your hands and ensuring that you are comfortable and having all the resources that you need to get the task done. And I think it's part of it is feel the fear and do it anyway. Challenge yourself to work and to do something that you've never done or that is uncomfortable for you.
I think that's excellent advice. I'd like to shift gears a little bit here and ask the panelists, what do you see as the primary responsibilities of a young lawyer representing clients pro bono? And how can the young lawyer ensure that he or she meets those obligations? Kathryn, do you mind starting us off?
So I think one thing to remember is that a client is a client. So regardless of whether this client is paying you by the hour or whether you've accepted this case pro bono, you want to take their case seriously and put the same amount of effort and energy into it. I think client communication is really, really key and can be sometimes a challenge with clients who may have changing phone numbers or may have to move more frequently or may have transportation issues. But that's one of those really important responsibilities that I always like to stress with our volunteers is just remain client-centered, remain focused on what the client wants and put the same amount of effort in you would for anyone else, and make sure that the client knows what you're doing and what's going to happen next and fully understands it.
Great, thank you. And Jay, could you weigh in on how a young lawyer representing clients pro bono can ensure that they meet their obligations?
Yeah, I guess so. Kind of following up on what Kathryn was saying and taking this movement lawyer perspective a little bit. I think a lot of times attorneys, we want to win, and we might define the win in this case. And it's important for us to stay connected and listen to the client and what is a win for them. A win for us, I learned this representing a client in a consumer debt case as well. And the opposing counsel was offering $200. I'm like, wow, that's a great deal. But she emphasized, I do not have this money. There's no way that I don't own anything. They can send me to collections. I cannot, pay this. And while in my mind, I was thinking, this is a win, why isn't she taking this? It was not a win for her. And provided that it's nothing, illegal or anything like that, I think it's important to listen to what the win is. Sometimes the win is, I want to send a message to, in regards to this issue, or I want to flag this issue so the next person can pick up where I left off or something like that. And so sometimes we get stuck in, especially if you're, either reviewing contracts all day or reading case law, we kind of just, well, this goes outside the bounds of the law. And sometimes you got to push back in terms of ensuring that the client gets the win they're asking for, particularly when it's related to systemic issues and things like that. So I think that's a big lesson for me, because I think at one point I was not listening to this client and I thought, this is a good deal. I don't want them to ruin your credit. Several things that I just want this to be over, and I don't want them to now renege on the $200 and bump it up to $5 or whatever out of the total that you owe. But it was a crucial lesson in listening and pushing the bounds a little bit. Of course, nothing that's outside the ethical rules or anything like that.
Thanks for sharing that experience, Jay. And Alexis, could I have you weigh in?
Yeah, so building off of that, I would say at first the responsibility at minimum is to do no harm, to have at least a net neutral effect and impact on the client and on the circumstance and situation. I know that I have already mentioned it, but I think it's worth emphasizing that a lot of people who I have represented have had really poor experiences with attorneys. And so even if the win in this case is helping them trust that someone actually cares about their situation and circumstance, at minimum, I think that is really, really worthwhile. And kind of what Jay was talking about, there was a period of time where I was representing people who were in prison, and what could possibly happen for them while they were in prison really was limited. And a lot of the people I was representing were people who were being retaliated against by the system for organizing inside the prison. And I would often ask, do you want me to speak truth to power? Or do you want me to get you removed out of maximum security isolation? And they would be like, well, I don't think they're going to release me from maximum security isolation anyway. So let's just speak truth to power. And so that them being able to witness someone like just say all the things that they wish they could say to the facility was worthwhile to them. Even with clients currently now in my current job, a lot of my clients, yes, I'm helping them with on a very specific particular issue so that they can get their license back, so that they can get certain debt off of their backs while they're trying to restabilize. But a lot of my clients, because they are formerly incarcerated, are also dealing with a lot of other problems. And sometimes they just need me to listen. Sometimes they just need to talk. Like, yes, we're talking about a very particular legal issue, and we're trying to figure out what's the strategy for, the hearing that's coming up. But then it's like, oh, such and such happened. This is going on. I feel kind of lost. I feel like I'm not in it. And it's more like, okay, now we're going to switch into like pep talk mode a little bit and be like, you're doing everything that you're supposed to be doing. And I know that it's hard, and it's set up to be hard. It is set up to be difficult. And my job here is to, and I always try to close it by bringing it back to what we are, what our attorney-client relationship is about, and saying, my job here is to make this thing easier for you. And so I think what we should be aspiring to as lawyers in the pro bono space, particularly at these early stages of our careers, are key makers and not gatekeepers, meaning that we are opening the doors to this system and to these courtrooms and these things that feel very scary and daunting for a lot of people for very valid reasons. And we are both there to open those doors for them. And we are also creating the keys and giving them the tools so that they can open those doors for themselves in the future. Because with pro bono work, we are coming in at a very specific moment in time. And who's to say that they might not have that problem again in the future? So these are also very critical opportunities to be like, hey, I'm here for you on this particular time and this particular time in your experience in your life. And, when we part ways, when our contract is over, I hope that you know how to do this to some degree, or I hope that you know where you can go for other resources, whether it be legal resources or social resources, so that you can also deal with this again in the future if you have to.
That's great, Alexis. Thank you. So you've all touched a little bit on understanding your clients' goals, and all of that stems from client communication, which of course remains one of the most important responsibilities of any lawyer. Panelists, how do you recommend communicating with clients who do not have access to transportation or the internet or a reliable phone, or somehow present other communications issues? Jay, can I come back to you to start us off?
Yeah, I think first, you want to always do your best to meet the client where they're at. And unfortunately, a lot of indigent clients will oftentimes, I remember having a client, we had to call her maybe on a break or, way after my work hours. But I think just being gracious and flexible, just like you would be with a paying client. If the client wants to talk at, 10 o'clock at night, a lot of times we're going to make it happen. And so a lot of folks are, working several jobs and their time may be limited. I think the other part is particularly when there isn't access to transportation or, different things like that, finding a way to even communicate with and still keeping their confidence, even with, family members, getting them the support that they need in terms of, okay, we're working on this with client A, who can I reach out to when we need to talk? We won't talk about your issues or anything, but is there someone else that can be a point of contact for you in this matter? And I think coming up with creative solutions with the client is very key, very early on in the relationship, so that you've set that pace moving forward in that client's matter.
Excellent. Thanks, Jay. Alexis, can I come to you next?
Yeah, definitely agree with everything that Jay said. And I set those expectations at intake. If at the intake meeting we're signing a retainer, what I will say is things happen, life happens. I'm never going to judge you for whatever is happening in your life. Just stay in contact with me. And so setting that expectation that this is a judgment-free zone, just make sure that you tell me when things are changing, has led to very good communication from all of my clients. I think that I've only had like one client who, you know, something abruptly happened and I lost communication with him. But, you know, this week alone, I've gotten several different text messages or things being like, hey, this is such and such new number, or hey, like I'm having problems with this email, use this email. And then those are for my clients who are, you know, out of prison. But then there are clients who are who are being prepared to come back, who are in a reentry preparation program. And we're actually currently having a situation where we're trying to figure out how to get in contact with them, in terms of like whether or not we can get into the prison, or like being able to set up, you know, some of these like different engines to be able to talk to them. But I'm always traveling all over, mostly Southeast Louisiana, sometimes other parts of Louisiana, to meet clients where they physically are. Especially since a lot of my clients have suspended driver's licenses, I will drive to where they are and like have them sign stuff. I have all kinds of portable scanners, printers, etc., so that it's like, all right, you signed this, we're scanning it in right now. It's done, it's good, you're good to go on breaks, etc. So really figuring out how to like physically meet them where they're at, and then also set those expectations early, have been really helpful.
That's great. Thanks, Alexis. And Kathryn, can I ask, how would you recommend overcoming these types of communication obstacles?
I definitely agree with Alexis and Jay about meeting the clients where they are. I think being flexible and trying to be as accessible as possible is really important. So asking the client, what is the best way for me to communicate with you? And then honoring what the client tells you. If that's text messages, you know, we have clients who we communicate with almost entirely through a computerized phone system that allows us to text. If that's email, great. If that's phone calls at a particular time, even outside of work hours, that's great. And I think just being patient and approaching it with empathy, recognizing that just because a client is difficult to reach doesn't mean that they don't care about this case, but they may have a lot of other things going on, is just really critical to the process. I also think really trying to take off your lawyer hat when talking to a client is really important. So we're used to using legalese. We're very comfortable with legal terminology. And sometimes it's easy to forget that a client may not be. So a client may not understand, you know, the words petitioner, movement, defendant. So to the extent that you can, try to communicate in plain language and create a space where the client feels comfortable enough to tell you if they don't understand something that you're saying to them. I've had some humbling experiences before where I've talked to a client for maybe 10 minutes, and then I ask them if they have any questions and they say no. But when we start to review the document, it becomes really clear that I did not convey the message in a way that was understandable to them. So yeah, just keep trying. And I think once you have established that trust with the client, everything from then on becomes much easier, and it's you can accomplish pretty much any goal if they feel comfortable telling you what's going on with them and whether or not they understand and asking questions.
Real quick, I'm glad you brought that up too, Kathryn. I was gonna talk about a little bit on the style of communication, because I know we're talking about the mode of communication, but I think it's also important to have some understanding, particularly if there are language barriers with the client, have an understanding of that, and carefully setting up the situation where if there is a third party, you know, there isn't any breach of that privilege or relationship, but also having some sort of third party to interpret, particularly if it's a family member or something like that. But also understanding some cultural aspect of the client, if they're from a different background, ensuring that the style of communication and what you're saying is understandable to the client, not only just from legalese perspective, but even a cultural perspective, to ensure that the client understands you and know what you're talking about.
Yeah, and to piggyback off of that a little bit, attorneys do need to connect with clients from these different socioeconomic backgrounds and very different life experiences from the attorney. And so based on your experience, what methods would you recommend to overcome these kind of potential trust issues that might be inherent in this attorney-client relationship with certain people? Any thoughts there, Alexis?
Yes. So I would say that one thing that I was thinking about, based on what Jay and Kathryn have said, is sometimes there are certain phrases or terms that I think when we want to be cognizant of how we're coming off, in terms of talking to people who are having different experiences from us. These are words or phrases that become accepted in like academic spaces, but they may not make sense to people who are having those lived experiences. And that happened to me recently, where I try to be very careful about my language around incarceration and prisons, and certain labels around there. And I said to a client, like returning home from prison. And this client was like, well, I don't have a home, so I don't consider it returning home because I have no home. And I was like, oh, I'm so sorry for the way that came off, like just coming out of prison and being back in the community that you're from. And so like that quick course correction of being like, oh, I misstepped. And I understand how that could land very poorly. And course correcting very quickly was something that helped develop that relationship between me and this client. And us also understanding that sometimes the frustrations that clients are having have nothing to do with you. So that same client, had a lot of other things going on, and was generally just frustrated and tired. And so it took longer for me to develop a relationship with this client, because of all this other stuff that's happening. But because I continued to come with like humility, empathy, compassion, and saying like, these are the ways I can help you, she eventually, has become a lot more communicative. Like we have a much better relationship now, because I was patient enough to understand my own missteps and then also not take everything so personally. I think another thing that can be useful, depending on whether you're a law student or a young lawyer, is putting yourself in spaces that are challenging, like anti-racist spaces, abolitionist spaces, like critical race theory spaces, like spaces that are going to challenge some of the lenses that we traditionally look at as attorneys, and try and put on a different framework or a different perspective, so that we're coming at not only our work, but we're coming at like human connections, in very empathetic ways that I think can get very lost when we are in a Black letter class or doing these other things. I think that development of being able to understand people human to human, is really, really critical, as we continue to build our own professional experiences as well.
Yeah, that's excellent. I really like what you said about creating that human connection. And Kathryn, do you have any additional advice on how to overcome these trust issues and create that human connection with your client?
That was so great. I don't know how I follow that, but I think just making sure that the client understands from day one that you care about what their goals are, that you're interested in what they have to say, that you want to help them in whatever way you can. I think establishing also upfront what your limitations are in terms of what you can and can't do for them, what the limits of the law are potentially to address their issue, is one way to help establish trust. Because one quick way to break someone's trust is to promise the moon and then not be able to deliver on what you said you would help with. So I think being very honest and very frank, while at the same time, understanding that you may not be able to do everything that the client needs, is important.
That's excellent. Thank you. So we have a trove of new lawyers who are just getting their bar results back in Ohio. They came out today, and they'll be getting sworn in here in the coming months. Where should a young lawyer start? Where can a young lawyer find meaningful pro bono work? And what resources are available to these new young lawyers to assist them in providing the representation? Kathryn, do you mind starting us off?
Sure. So check your local organizations. There are nonprofits that would be delighted to have your help, and that can, like I said before, that can look like many different things. There's a resource called Pro Bono Net, probono.net, and there's a Pro Bono Net /Louisiana for Louisiana in particular that will talk about different types of ways you can engage and have calendars of events and things like that. And then it can also be helpful just to get out in the community. Events that aren't necessarily legal in nature may bring up needs, and you may be able to say, oh, I could probably help with that, and then reach out to the people that you interacted with there. So just a few ideas.
Jay, do you have any other ideas to build on?
Yeah, definitely, get connected to, I'm all about local, what's going on in your town, your city, your community. Get connected to, first the bar, they know the organizations that are out there, find out if there is and I know in the area you're in and your organization, Kathryn, is the Pro Bono Project. There are similar organizations in different states. I know we have one here in Ohio. Get on their listserv, get on your bar's listserv. If you're from a diverse background, a lot of the affinity bars are constantly engaged in pro bono work, particularly partnering with the law schools or anything like that. So your affinity bar is also a great place to start if you're looking to get involved in pro bono work. And if you're ever so brave and you work at a firm, you can start a pro bono effort. And that would, for both selfish and non-selfish reasons, it'll definitely put you up for, showcasing your leadership skills to manage and build a different type of practice, but also really connecting with other organizations and getting your firm connected with other organizations locally. Because clients and companies and organizations are getting more aware of the social good that we're doing in our community. And sometimes we might question the motivation, but a lot of times the impact is beneficial to the community. So that's also one thing to think about.
Thank you. And Alexis, do you have any additional resources or suggestions on a young lawyer who wants to get started providing pro bono representation?
Yeah, I will do another plug for JAC's expungement clinics. For those of you who are in Louisiana, we host a CLE where lawyers can start to learn expungement law in Louisiana. And then we have volunteer attorneys who come to the expungement clinics, both in New Orleans and in other parts of the state, because we do try to do expungement clinics kind of all over the state. And what I've seen in my time here at JAC is that there are volunteer attorneys who come and are like, I have no idea what I'm doing. And they're coming up to us being like, okay, is this right? Is this right? Is this right? And like, we welcome all those questions because we want the paperwork and everything to be correct. And then they keep coming back and keep coming back. And then they themselves become an expert in expungement law. And become very skilled at filling out the paperwork, and the volunteer experience is within that concrete, clinic period of time. So I think that if you're in Louisiana and you're interested, definitely go to JC Louisiana. But finding other organizations in your communities that do things like that, or are having clinics in different respects and realms, can be really beneficial. I also am in terms of hustling, making my hobbies work opportunities. And so if you have certain hobbies and you issue spot like a legal issue and be like, hey, like, is this something that y'all need support on? Do you have people who are supporting? Then plug in these other ways as well, like Kathryn was saying.
And to quickly jump in here, wherever you're located, I would strongly urge you to get connected to an eviction clinic or like a foreclosure mediation program. There's just a lot of need there in terms of, now that we're coming out of the pandemic and people have fallen behind on mortgage payments or rent payments or things like that. So I know that's a constant need, might be a national, thing, depending on where you're located. But I know in many places, there's just a real need for attorneys to assist with even just mediating, just really talking between the client and the company, the bank, or whoever, to work out a plan to get that person caught up. And those are skills that we as attorneys need, is kind of learning when to push, how to negotiate, how to speak to a client, how to speak to a client that's in power or that's considered more sophisticated, and then speaking to communicating the message from a lay person to that client, or to that bank. So I think that's a large need right now, and just representing people in eviction so that they're not having that can really impact someone's life long term, because it really impacts whether they can rent and where they can rent, if there's an eviction on their record and things like that. So I would encourage people to seek out those types of opportunities as well.
Thanks, Jay. In our last few minutes, I'd like maybe each of you could provide just one kind of takeaway piece of advice for young lawyers starting out in practice who are considering taking on their very first pro bono representation, or maybe expanding into a new area a little bit. Just one kind of takeaway piece of advice, if you have one. Kathryn, could I come back to you?
Yes. I don't know if it's advice so much as just overarching consideration. We are so privileged to have this legal education, and we have access that so many people do not. And I would love it if every lawyer out there would consider it part of their duty and their professional responsibility and their moral and ethical obligation to really take on pro bono matters regularly, not just here and there, but as a part of their practice. If everybody did that, if everybody fulfilled the recommended 50 hours of pro bono service per year that the ABA recommends, we could fill that access to justice gap. So if everybody would just pitch in a little bit and make that part of their regular practice, it would make a huge difference.
That's excellent, Kathryn. Thank you. And Jay, do you have a takeaway piece of advice or other suggestion that you'd like to provide?
Yeah, I think one of the skills that pro bono really helps you develop, particularly when you're working with the client, one of the skills that's so underutilized is listening. I can't tell you, admittedly, how many times I've gotten in trouble for not listening, because if you're not listening, you're not really hearing the client's needs and what they want. And I really think this is an area that you really get to practice those listening skills to ensure that you're representing the person in the way that they want. So it sounds kind of simplistic, but a lot of times, we get caught up behind a computer or whatever. And in many ways, a lot of different pro bono work. I know not all, but a lot of different areas that you're going to do that type of work in really puts you in a situation where you need to listen to the parties and what they're wanting to get done and what they want to achieve.
That's great, Jay. Thank you. And Alexis, do you have a takeaway for us?
Yeah, I really want to emphasize what Jay said. And I think part of that listening and part of that plugging in is understanding that the ways that we as lawyers define success, define wins, define like certain things that to us may seem like it has a very specific definition, a very specific understanding, is not the same across the board, is not the same when it comes to the reality of the situation. There are so many cases in which the law is built in a certain way and the reality of the circumstance of people based on those laws are very different. And so I think listening with a humble mindset, listening and understanding that we do have access and privilege. And also sometimes those accesses and privileges can blind us to the realities of people's circumstances and situations are really key and critical. So if you come into this with that humility, with your listening ears on, with an open heart and compassion and empathy, I think that is a phenomenal and important starting point when coming into this work.
Yeah, it's a great point, Alexis. Thank you so much. And thank you to our audience and to our listeners. Thank you for joining in and tuning in today. I hope you found this webinar to be interesting and informative. And we encourage you to continue to think about how you will incorporate pro bono work into your career. And a huge thank you again to our panelists for joining us and giving your time so generously. Take care all. That concludes today's webinar.
Take care.